The first failure isn't the blackout. It's what the blackout hides. When the grid goes down, most people focus on what they've lost: light, communication, access, control. But the real danger isn't the absence of power. It's the sudden exposure of everything that depended on it. And in that exposure, value changes instantly. Items that once seemed insignificant, cheap, replaceable, forgettable, become critical. Not because they gain new properties, but because the systems that made them irrelevant are gone. This is where the first hidden supply emerges. Clean water containers, not water itself, containers. The danger begins when people assume water is the priority, and it is, but they overlook the infrastructure required to store, transport, and protect it. In a functioning system, water flows on demand. You turn a tap and it appears. Storage is unnecessary. After grid failure, that assumption collapses. Water systems rely on electric pumps, pressure regulation, and treatment cycles. When power is lost, pressure drops. Contamination risk rises. Flow becomes intermittent, then stops. At that point, access to water shifts from continuous to opportunistic. And opportunistic resources require storage. The analysis reveals a critical gap. Most households have minimal capacity to store large volumes of water safely. Bottles, small containers, maybe a few jugs, but nothing designed for sustained use. This creates an immediate bottleneck. You might find water, but you can't keep it. The misunderstanding is subtle but widespread. People believe that once they locate a water source, a stream, a tank, a distribution point, the problem is solved. But without proper containers, that water cannot be transported efficiently, cannot be protected from contamination, and cannot be rationed over time. You become dependent on repeated trips, and repeated trips increase exposure. The hidden science here lies in contamination vectors. Water, once collected, is vulnerable to bacteria, particulates, and environmental toxins. Improper containers, previously used for other substances, poorly sealed or degraded, introduce contaminants that can make the water unsafe within hours. Even clean water can become dangerous if stored incorrectly. The evidence is consistent across disaster scenarios. In post-disaster environments, secondary illness from contaminated storage often exceeds initial injuries. People who survived the event fall sick days later, not from lack of water, but from compromised water. And illness in a system without medical support escalates rapidly. The survival implications are immediate. Those with proper storage, sealed, durable, portable containers gain stability. They reduce movement. They control intake. They maintain hydration without constant exposure. Those without them are forced into repeated risk cycles, moving between source and shelter, increasing visibility and vulnerability. This is how a simple object becomes priceless, not because it's rare, but because it solves a problem most people didn't anticipate. The escalation begins as awareness spreads. People realize water isn't accessible anymore. They search for sources. They gather what they can. Containers become scarce, not in stores, but in circulation. What exists is already owned. What's available is inadequate, and as scarcity increases, behavior shifts. Containers are no longer just tools, they are assets. They are traded, stolen, guarded, because without them, even access to water doesn't guarantee survival. The transition is complete. Water is no longer a utility. It is a resource, and resources require systems to manage them. Without those systems, even abundance becomes useless. The second hidden supply is less visible. It doesn't store anything. It doesn't produce anything. But without it, everything else becomes harder to use: manual tools. The danger begins with dependency. Modern life is built on powered efficiency. Electric tools, automated systems, digital interfaces, these remove the need for physical effort and mechanical understanding. When the grid fails, that layer disappears instantly. What remains is the raw environment, and the ability to interact with it manually becomes critical. The analysis shows a sharp divide. People who rely exclusively on powered tools lose functionality immediately. They cannot cut, repair, open, or build without electricity. Tasks that were once trivial become barriers. Even accessing supplies can become difficult. Sealed packaging, reinforced containers, structural obstacles. Without manual tools, these become time-consuming or impossible. The misunderstanding is believing that tools are interchangeable, that if one method fails, another can replace it. But manual tools are not just substitutes. They are foundational. They operate independently of external systems. They require no power, No connectivity, no infrastructure. The hidden science lies in mechanical advantage. Simple tools, levers, blades, wedges amplify human strength. They allow tasks to be completed with less energy, less time, and less risk. Without them, effort increases exponentially, and energy becomes a limiting factor. Every calorie burned is a resource lost. The evidence appears in survival environments where individuals without proper tools expend significantly more energy for basic tasks. Cutting wood, opening containers, securing shelter all become inefficient. Over time, this inefficiency leads to fatigue, reduced mobility, and increased vulnerability. The survival implications are clear. Those with manual tools maintain capability. They adapt. They solve problems. They create solutions. Those without them are constrained. They rely on others, on luck, or on diminishing strength. And reliance is risk. Because in a resource-scarce environment, dependency is exploited. The escalation begins when tools become scarce. Not because they don't exist, but because they are no longer accessible. Stores are closed. Supply chains are broken. What's available is what people already have. And those who have tools recognize their value quickly. They protect them. They prioritize them. They become selective in their use, because every use carries wear. And replacement is no longer guaranteed. The transition is subtle but irreversible. Tools shift from convenience to necessity, from replaceable to irreplaceable. And those who lack them begin to fall behind, not immediately but progressively. Because every task takes longer, every effort costs more, and every delay compounds. The third hidden supply is something most people overlook completely, because it doesn't look like survival equipment, it looks like waste. But after grid failure, waste becomes a threat, and managing it becomes essential. Sanitation materials. The danger begins with accumulation. When systems fail, waste removal stops. No sewage processing, no garbage collection, no drainage maintenance. Everything that leaves your body or your environment stays where it is unless you move it. And waste doesn't remain neutral. It decomposes, it attracts, it contaminates. The analysis reveals a cascading effect. Improper waste management leads to bacterial growth. That growth spreads through surfaces, air, and water. In confined spaces, it accelerates. In shared environments, it multiplies. This creates a secondary crisis. Not from external threats, but from internal conditions. The misunderstanding is believing that waste is a secondary concern, that it can be ignored temporarily while focusing on more immediate needs like food and water. But waste directly impacts those needs. Contaminated environments compromise food safety. They compromise water storage. They compromise health. The hidden science lies in microbial proliferation. Bacteria thrive in nutrient-rich waste. Without proper containment and disposal, populations grow exponentially. Some produce toxins, others spread disease, and in the absence of sanitation systems, exposure becomes unavoidable. The evidence is clear in every prolonged disruption. Disease outbreaks follow sanitation failure, not immediately but within days. And once they begin, they spread rapidly, especially in dense or enclosed environments. The survival implications are severe. Those with sanitation materials, bags, disinfectants, barriers, containment systems, can isolate waste, reduce contamination, and maintain a livable environment. Those without them experience degradation, not just of their surroundings, but of their health. And health, once compromised, is difficult to recover without support. The escalation begins as conditions worsen, odors spread, insects appear. Surfaces become unsafe. People begin to move, not because of external threats, but because their environment becomes uninhabitable. And movement, again, increases exposure. The transition is unavoidable. Waste is no longer something you discard. It is something you must manage, actively, continuously, or it will manage you. 3 supplies, all overlooked, all critical, and all connected by a single principle. They don't create resources. They preserve them. Preservation is not passive. It is a system of control. After the first grid failure, survival is no longer determined by what you have. It's determined by how long you can make it last without degradation, loss, or exposure. And most people fail here not because they lack resources, but because they lack the means to preserve them. This is where the fourth hidden supply emerges. Ignition, not fuel, not heat. The ability to start fire, reliably, repeatedly, under imperfect conditions. The danger begins when fire is treated as a convenience instead of a controlled reaction. In modern systems, heat is automated. Cooking, boiling, sterilizing, all delegated to powered devices. When those systems fail, the knowledge and tools required to generate controlled combustion become critical, and most people are unprepared. They may have matches. Maybe a lighter, but they lack redundancy. They lack protection from moisture. They lack the ability to generate sparks when primary tools fail. And failure in this context is not a possibility. It is an inevitability. The analysis reveals a dependency chain. Fire enables water purification, food preparation, temperature regulation, and even psychological stability. Without it, multiple survival functions degrade simultaneously. Cold food becomes a risk. Contaminated water remains unsafe. Exposure to low temperatures increases. Morale declines. The misunderstanding is believing that fire is easy, that it can be created when needed with minimal effort. But controlled fire requires three variables: fuel, oxygen, and ignition. Remove reliability from ignition and the entire system becomes unstable, because you cannot guarantee success. And failure to start a fire at the wrong time, during cold exposure, after water contamination, or under physical fatigue, can escalate quickly into a life-threatening situation. The hidden science lies in combustion thresholds. Ignition requires sufficient heat to initiate a chemical reaction. Environmental factors, humidity, wind, fuel quality, affect this threshold. Improvised methods often fail under suboptimal conditions. Reliable ignition tools bypass these variables. They create consistent, repeatable heat sources. The evidence is clear in survival case studies. Individuals with redundant ignition systems, multiple lighters, ferro rods, protected matches, maintain fire capability under adverse conditions. Those without them face repeated failure, increasing frustration, energy loss, and risk. The survival implications are direct. Fire is not optional, it is foundational. And without reliable ignition, every other resource becomes harder to use, less safe, and less effective. The escalation begins as conditions degrade. Weather shifts, materials become damp, physical exhaustion sets in. The margin for error shrinks. What once worked easily now requires precision and energy you may not have. And without redundancy, a single failure becomes a cascade. The transition is complete. Fire is no longer a tool. It is a lifeline. The fifth hidden supply is silent. It doesn't produce heat. It doesn't store resources, but without it, your ability to function deteriorates rapidly. Light, not ambient light. Controlled, portable illumination. The danger begins when darkness becomes total. In a grid-dependent world, darkness is rare. Even at night, artificial light fills the environment, streetlights, buildings, devices. When the grid fails, that baseline disappears. Darkness becomes absolute, and absolute darkness changes behavior. Movement slows, perception narrows, risk increases. The analysis shows that human vision is highly dependent on light gradients. In low-light conditions, depth perception weakens, color recognition fades, and reaction time increases. In complete darkness, navigation becomes guesswork, and guesswork in a hazardous environment leads to injury. The misunderstanding is assuming that your eyes will adjust, that night vision will compensate for the loss of artificial light. While adaptation occurs, it is limited. It does not restore full functionality. It only improves sensitivity within constraints. Obstacles remain hidden, threats remain unseen, paths become uncertain. The hidden science lies in photoreceptor response. Rod cells in the eye increase sensitivity in low light but sacrifice detail and color. This trade-off reduces accuracy. Fine movements become harder to detect. Peripheral vision becomes unreliable. In practical terms, you see less. And what you see is less precise. The evidence is consistent. Injury rates increase significantly in low-light environments. Falls, cuts, collisions. Even simple tasks become dangerous. Cooking, moving through debris, handling tools, all carry increased risk. The survival implications are immediate. Those with reliable light sources maintain functionality after dark. They move safely. They work efficiently. They reduce injury risk. Those without light are forced into inactivity or risk movement blindly. Both options carry cost. Inactivity limits productivity. Blind movement increases danger. The escalation begins when darkness extends beyond night. Indoor environments become permanently dim. Windows provide limited light. Cloud cover reduces visibility further. Over time, your operational window shrinks. You become less effective. Less aware, less capable, the transition is clear. Light is no longer a convenience. It is a requirement for safe operation. The sixth hidden supply is often dismissed as minor, until communication fails completely. Signaling tools, not phones, not digital devices, analog methods of communication. The danger begins with isolation. When the grid fails, communication networks degrade. Cell towers lose power. Internet infrastructure collapses. Information flow stops. You are cut off not just from distant systems, but from nearby individuals, and isolation limits coordination. The analysis reveals a critical gap. Without communication, you cannot share information, request assistance, or coordinate movement. You operate in a vacuum, making decisions based on incomplete data. This increases risk, because uncertainty leads to poor decisions. The misunderstanding is believing that communication is only necessary for large-scale coordination, that it's irrelevant at the individual level. But in survival environments, even small-scale communication can determine outcomes. A signal can prevent conflict. It can establish intent. It can create cooperation. Without it, every interaction becomes ambiguous. And ambiguity is dangerous. The hidden science lies in signaling theory. Clear, recognizable signals reduce uncertainty between individuals. They communicate intent without requiring proximity. This reduces the likelihood of misinterpretation and conflict. Without signals, every encounter defaults to caution or aggression. The evidence appears in environments where communication breaks down, misunderstandings increase, conflicts escalate, opportunities for cooperation are missed. Individuals operate defensively even when cooperation would be beneficial. The survival implications are significant. Those with signaling tools, whistles, mirrors, visual markers, can communicate presence, intent, and need without direct contact. They can reduce risk, coordinate movement, and establish boundaries. Those without them rely on proximity. And proximity increases exposure. The escalation begins as isolation deepens. Information becomes fragmented. Rumors replace facts. Decisions are made with less certainty. Encounters become more frequent and more unpredictable. And without communication, every encounter carries higher stakes. The transition is complete. Communication is no longer about convenience. It is about reducing risk. 6 supplies, all underestimated, all essential, and all connected by a single principle. They extend your control over an environment that is actively degrading. Control at this stage is no longer about comfort. It is about limiting loss. After the first grid failure, every resource begins a countdown. Water evaporates or contaminates, food spoils, energy depletes, attention fragments. The individuals who survive longest are not those who gather the most, but those who slow the rate at which everything disappears. This is where the 7th hidden supply emerges. Repair materials, not complete systems, not full replacements. Simple, adaptable materials that allow you to fix what breaks before it becomes unusable. The danger begins with assumption. People assume that what they have will remain functional, that containers will hold, clothing will last, structures will stay intact. But in a degraded environment where accelerates, stress increases, materials fail faster. A small crack becomes a leak. A loose seam becomes exposure. A minor break becomes total loss. The analysis reveals that most failures are not catastrophic, they are incremental. But incremental failures compound. A leaking container wastes water. Damaged clothing reduces insulation. A broken strap limits mobility. Individually, these issues seem manageable. Together, they erode capability. The misunderstanding is believing that repair requires specialized tools or expertise. That if something breaks beyond basic function, it is no longer usable. This mindset comes from a disposable system, where replacement is easier than repair. But replacement no longer exists. The hidden science lies in material fatigue and stress distribution. Small reinforcements, tape, cordage, patches, redistribute stress, preventing further damage. They extend lifespan. They preserve function. Without them, degradation accelerates. The evidence is visible in every prolonged survival scenario. Equipment failure is a primary cause of resource loss, not because the equipment was poor, but because it could not be maintained. Those with repair capability adapt. They extend the life of critical items far beyond expected limits. The survival implications are direct. Repair materials convert temporary resources into sustained assets. They allow you to maintain water storage, clothing integrity, shelter stability, and tool functionality. Without them, every item has a fixed lifespan, and once that lifespan ends, the resource is gone. The escalation begins as failures accumulate. Multiple small issues emerge simultaneously. Without repair, they compete for attention. You are forced to prioritize which problem to solve, which to ignore. Ignored problems worsen. And eventually one reaches a critical threshold. The transition is clear. Maintenance becomes survival. Neglect becomes loss. The eighth hidden supply is often underestimated because it doesn't seem tangible. It doesn't store energy. It doesn't create resources, but it preserves something more critical: information, not digital files, not stored data, usable, accessible, offline knowledge. The danger begins with dependence on memory. In a connected world, information is externalized. You don't need to remember processes, you look them up. Instructions, maps, procedures, all available instantly. When the grid fails, that access disappears. And what remains is what you already know. The analysis reveals a significant gap. Most people retain only surface-level knowledge of critical tasks: how to purify water, how to treat injuries, how to navigate without digital aids. Without reference, errors increase, and errors carry cost. The misunderstanding is believing that knowledge is permanent, that once learned, it can be recalled accurately under stress. But stress degrades recall. Fatigue impairs memory. Complex processes become harder to execute. Even simple tasks can be misapplied. The hidden science lies in cognitive load and recall under stress. The human brain prioritizes immediate threats over stored information. Under pressure, it simplifies decisions, often at the expense of accuracy. Written references reduce cognitive load, allowing precise execution. Without them, improvisation increases, and improvisation increases risk. The evidence is consistent. In survival environments, individuals with access to clear, concise instructions, whether written, printed, or memorized in structured form, perform tasks more effectively. They make fewer errors. They conserve resources. Those without reference rely on guesswork, and guesswork leads to failure. The survival implications are profound. Information is not just knowledge, it is capability. It allows you to perform tasks correctly, efficiently, and safely. It reduces uncertainty. It increases confidence. It preserves resources by preventing mistakes. Without it, even available resources can be wasted. The escalation begins as complexity increases. Basic tasks become routine, but advanced needs emerge: medical treatment, structural repair, navigation. Without guidance, these tasks become barriers, and barriers limit survival options. The transition is complete. Knowledge is no longer optional, it is operational. The ninth hidden supply is the most misunderstood, because it doesn't look like a supply at all. It looks like preparation, mobility readiness. Not movement itself, the ability to move when required, quickly, efficiently, and without delay. The danger begins with fixation. After the grid fails, people anchor themselves to locations, their homes, their supplies, their perceived safety. This fixation creates inertia. Movement is delayed. Decisions are postponed until movement becomes necessary. And by then, conditions have changed. The analysis reveals a critical timing issue. Early movement is controlled. Late movement is reactive. Controlled movement allows planning, route selection, and resource management. Reactive movement occurs under pressure with limited options, and limited options increase risk.